What up, Wizards? It's Dev, and it is time for my favorite video of each and every preview season. We're talking sleepers, everybody, and this time I'm especially excited because there are a few cards in this set that are kind of soaking up all of the hype that people are really excited about in Standard, but there are a ton this time that I think are flying well under the radar and deserve some much-needed attention. So let's not waste another second. I want to go ahead and get right to it. I got a lot of words to say about every single card in this video. We should be expeditious because the sleepers in this set are the stuff of nightmares. Let's go, everybody.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back with our honorable mention. Told you I'd get right to it. This time, it's a card that I've already done a good bit of screaming about over the course of this preview season, and nobody else seems to care, but I care about Unable to Scream. And I bet you wish I was unable to scream about this card anymore, but I hope that you won't begrudge me one more time during preview season talking about how good this card is, at least in my opinion. So I'm not going to spend too long on it here. I want to get to the main list, but all I'm going to say is that it is better than Witness Protection. I keep looking at it thinking there's got to be a way Witness Protection is better than this. It's not. This gives the creature no power. Sure, it gives it an extra toughness. I don't really care. I don't care at all. I still think this is maybe the best piece of blue removal that's ever been printed in the history of Magic the Gathering. I know that the comment section is probably going to have like 10 different pieces they think are better than this, and maybe even some of them are, but as far as I can tell for Standard right now, this is the best piece of removal we could possibly hope for, and I will continue to scream about it because I am able to do so. But if there's one thing I seem to be unable to do, it is shut up about this card, which I'm going to do my best to do right now, and maybe you'll never have to hear me talk about it again, but I got a feeling it'll pop up from time to time. But that said, let's go ahead and move on to the real list here. Number 10 is usually an extension of the honorable mentions, no different this time. Let's go from the Scream to the screen. Take a look at the screen over here, which is what I do most of the day anyway, everybody. It's Haunted Screen, which is actually kind of immediately upon release the best 3-mana rock in Standard, and that's got to mean something. And I know you're going to say Ancient Cornucopia to me, which is probably a better card than this, but only green decks can play that, whereas any deck can play this, and obviously Orzhov or Mono White or Mono Black will prioritize it. Now, just to let you know, I don't think this card is incredible or anything. Don't adjust your dials. I'm not that dumb, but what I do think is, again, there's just not a whole lot of better options to use in Standard if you're a not green deck that wants to ramp on turn 3. So I like that about it, and to be honest, I kind of really like the making it a creature mode too. You know, you can slap it on the table in the relative early game, and it just kind of hangs out through all them Sunfalls and other sweepers and stuff like that, and then later in the game it just becomes a huge dude, and look at that, it's been on the table for like the whole game now, so it effectively has haste. It also technically has like a pretty ridiculous threat of activation on it, where if you have like 7 open mana, your opponent can't swing into your mana rock, which is kind of interesting. And then if they don't swing into it, you can just make it a 7/7 at EOT and start your turn with a big man. Plus there's like dumb tricks that'll probably never happen, but like imagine this with an Innkeeper's Talent. You know, and they're on curve together, so you like turn 2 talent, turn 3 this, and then later on in the game when you go to put the counters on it, it gets 14 counters instead, so like you can have that trick for free. I bet it's fun. Oh, and one last quick tip, by the way, what do you do when your TV is saying mean things to you? Well, you just assume it's all projection. Let's move on to number 9. Sorry. It's Dissection Tools, everybody. I know this card is probably not very good, but what is a Sleepers video for if not to speculate wildly on the first couple of entries? But when you really get down to it and you start dissecting this card, it actually might be way better than it looks. 5 mana is too much, and that's literally the only downside on the entire card. Oh, you think that sacrificing a creature is a downside? Which I find hard to believe because I know for a fact that you've played Magic. There are plenty of decks in this Standard that can take advantage of this mode in a number of ways. For one, there's the obvious stuff. Bartolomé del Presidio decks are pretty decent with this because it's a free sacrifice outlet effectively, and eventually you just move the tools onto Bartolomé and then he's like an enormous Death Touch lifelink guy, which is probably good enough, but just imagine putting this on like a Zora line or something like that. And then you have a 5/5 flying Death Touch lifelink that, sure, you got to sacrifice stuff to equip the dissection tools, but Zoraline can just get it back from your graveyard whenever she attacks. Oh, and by the way, the equip cost on this, the first time you equip it to a creature other than the thing it manifests dread or whatever, is effectively free. Just sacrifice the creature it's on that you got for free. So if you want to immediately equip this to anything else, Just sacrifice the little Manifest Dread guy that's wearing it and move it to something else. Again, this is effectively a free equip the moment it comes into play, which I don't think anyone's really talking about, and they should. Now for number 8, let's look at a card that I don't have a whole lot of tech written down for. That's kind of why it's number 8, but every time you see an effect like this, you have to know that it's like incredibly powerful. So let's take a look at Cursed Recording here, which is actually one of the earliest cards spoiled in the set. So I think a lot of people have forgotten about it for that reason. But I also think a lot of people read this initially and were like, oh, that's a gimmicky, stupid red rare that costs too much mana. It's never going to do anything. And I think it's possible that you're wrong. That's kind of the whole point of a sleeper video anyways. Like, have you really thought about this? Have you actually thought about this? Because Curse Recording, sure, it's whenever you cast any instant or sorcery, regardless of whether or not you use the recording to copy it, it's going to get a counter. When it gets a certain number of counters, it kills you. Or does it? I actually have to ask you, because there's a ton of life gain in Standard right now, just in general, that you may be able to get over 20 while you have like 6 counters on this, so you don't have to fear it so much. But especially when you cast spells like, say, Corrupt with this thing out, and you copy your Corrupt, and I know this costs 2 red mana, and Corrupt costs swamps, you know, but it's actually not as hard to engineer as you might think it is. And even if your Corrupt only does 4 or 5 damage instead of the typical at least 6 damage that it does when you cast it on curve, well, okay, you know, I'm still dealing 8 to you and gaining 8 on the low end of things. I'm dealing 10 to you and gaining 10. So again, in that situation, when Curse Recording actually comes around to the point where it might deal the 20 damage, I'm not really sweating it as often. Plus, there's just the fact that 7 is a lot. Cast 7 instants or sorceries and then it 20s you. Well, like, I can probably win the game by copying like 3 of them. You know, like, I imagine once you get this down and you copy a spell with it, that might lead to a concession. Like, the simplest thing here that I actually think is one of the most effective things you can do with it is just copy like a Go for the Throat and kill 2 of their guys with 1 spell and then attack them. It seems kind of good to me. Well, let's move on to number 7 here, which is probably going to be a relatively short stop. I don't have that much to say about Tyvar the Pummeler, but what I will say is that in some ways he meets the truest definition of a sleeper. You know, what is a sleeper? Well, usually it's a card that has to wait some amount of time before it's relevant in Standard. It is not just a card that's not receiving enough attention. It's often a card that's literally laying dormant for some amount of time until there's a Standard rotation or until they print cards in a Standard that are relevant with it. And in this case, I think that Tyvar fits that particular bill. You see, a couple of months from now, we're going to get Magic Foundations, which is kind of a core set, something like that. It's going to be in Standard for like 5 years. It's huge. It's got nearly 400 cards in it. Crazy set coming out in a couple of months here, but we know for a fact that set is going to have Lawn of War Elves in it. So not only will we get Larry the Lawnmower, and this is where we get into some speculation, but I think that it's fairly safe speculation, with the stated goal, the purpose, the steez even, of a set like Foundations, I imagine we'll probably get some elf synergies. And even if we don't get some elf synergies, we'll probably get a couple of strong elves apart from just Lawnmower Elves. And don't forget, we have elves right now. There's an elf from Dominaria United that's a 2-drop, plays on curve with Tyvar, and gives all elves +1/+1. And not only that, it's like whenever an elf comes into play, you pay a green and draw a card. That's ludicrous. That's a ludicrous Magic card. That's going to get even better. It too is a sleeper once Foundations comes out. But as far as Tyvar goes, he's one of the best possible 3-drops I could imagine for a deck like this in Standard, right? He's got a form of Regenerate and Indestructibility mode on him, and you should have plenty of creatures on your board to tap if you're playing elves correctly. So check that ability. But even more importantly, I think his activated ability is actually very, very strong in an elves deck. Not only are you ramping in that deck, so you should be able to hit his activated ability even if it costs you tapping a couple of creatures down. But even if Tyvar is your largest creature, you're still kind of casting Overrun for its traditional magic or mana value, right? 5 mana for +3/+3 if Tyvar is your largest creature ain't bad. If you got the Anthem effect out, everything gets +4/+4, and God forbid you have a larger elf than that. If you have a 5/5 elf, giving +5/+5 to your whole team basically reads win the game. So I think that activated ability has gotten literally 0 attention, and it deserves way more. Tyvar is a pretty good card, and I think he's going to get a chance to flex that in a couple of months. Now, Ziggy showed up, and that's great for obvious reasons, but it's great for an additional reason. That's because I think my number 6 actually perfectly describes him. It's Silent Hall Creeper up here. Now, I will admit, because you're already typing this comment, I understand. I get you. This card did get some attention. It did get some praise, some tech braining and all that the first day that it was previewed. But within a couple hours, I feel like everyone dropped it like the hottest potato in Idaho and just moved on to the next exciting thing that was in preview season. I haven't heard hardly any discussion about this card since, I don't know, 6 hours after it was first released. And I think that's a shame. You need to remember it exists because it is immediately the best blue beatdown 2-drop in Standard. And I know not a whole lot of competition for that slot, but it does matter, I promise. But you know what's really good with this? Mockingbird is phenomenal with this card, you know? Basically, if Mockingbird copies this, then you get to draw at least 2 cards off of your 2 guys. That's good, but they both eventually become 3/3s, and the Mockingbird will keep its flying when it copies this guy. It'll be a flying, unblockable dude. This can copy the Mockingbird, and I'm still not exactly sure what happens when it does that, but I'm pretty sure it just becomes a silent Hall Creeper. So at that point, you can just keep getting through for 3 unblocked damage every single turn. But there's more, you know. Previously, my favorite blue beatdown 2-drop in the format was probably Surge Engine. Not Surge Engine, but somebody on chat put it the other night. No, Surge Engine. Copies Surge Engine really well too, because yeah, when it copies the creature eventually, it's going to lose its unblockability. But if it copies a Surge Engine, well then suddenly it's a 5/4, if I'm not mistaken, that you can just make unblockable for a single blue mana. And that is also, as scientists sometimes say, dope. So I think this card is actually really, really good, and I've only given you a few examples as to why. I think there are far more. But you have made it halfway through the list. Congratulations, everybody. You put up with me this long. I think you can make it through to the end. Number 5 is Roaring Furnace and Steaming Sauna. Now I can understand thinking not only this card, but a majority of rooms in this set are a steaming something, but I actually think there's a good bit to this one, and I've heard very nearly nobody talk about it. They kind of snuck it in on us in the last couple of days of previews. Matter of fact, the day that it got originally previewed, there were a bunch of other like low quality rooms in that batch of previews, so I think a lot of people just kind of skimmed over all the rooms on that day. We're like, rooms are bad, I hate them. I just don't think this card is getting a whole lot of love right now, and it probably should. For one, on the left side, it's a sorcery speed Fires of Victory, which I'm not gonna like say is great, right? But it comes stapled to a thing that draws you a card every single turn and is also Library of Ling. You know, Reliquary Tower plus a one-sided Howling Mine. I'm an old school guy. I speak exclusively in old school cards. And putting both those cards together is something that I did a lot back in the day, so I imagine that if the Howling Mine in this case is not drawing my opponent's cards, that makes that combo even better. In a way, the fact that you can just remove a creature when you first play this means that you're buying yourself a little bit of time to actually get to the sauna, which is important. But of course, you can play, you know, if you are an Izzet, you can play like Ill-Timed Explosion or something as your sweeper on turn 4, unlock this door on turn 5, and now you are burying your opponent in a mountain of card advantage every turn that goes by. I think that it's possible that there's like a tap out control deck out there that plays, you know, Jeskai colors or something like that, and uses this card as kind of a marquee card to ensure that it is able to get deep card advantage, because this does that. Make no mistake, this gets you very good card advantage deep into the game. But let's move into number 4, everybody, because I'm excited about this one. This is actually the card that's moved up my list the most. You know, this actually started at number 9 on this list, but the more I think about it, the more I think what I should do is pose a hypothetical to you. What if I told you that they reprinted Dark Confidant into Standard? Would you be excited about that? What if I then told you that this Dark Confidant can actually draw you a card the turn it comes out, rather than having to wait for your next upkeep? Sounds pretty exciting, right? Well, it's not exactly Dark Confidant by any stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, there's just nothing like curling up with a good bookworm. You know what I mean? Oblivious Bookworm over here is a Bark Confidant. I'm going to try to make that joke work, because Simic cares about trees. Bark Confidant? Anyway, this is a 2-mana 2/3, which is just fine stats. It's actually better stats than Bob, Dark Confidant. So I guess I got to point that out too. But this does not straight up draw you cards unless you're like Manifesting Dread or disguising a guy or any number of things that let you put a face down dude on the table. But what if we Sharpied this card? What if in fact that whole last bit of the text box was not on the card at all, it would still be a pretty good Magic card. In this case, it's just extra gravy, and it's worth noting that a lot of Manifest Dread things cost 3 mana. You know, Disguising costs 3 mana. So if you play this as your 2-drop, then on turn 3, you should be able to just draw a card free and clear off of it in your like Disguise or Manifest Dread or face down, booty up deck or whatever you're trying to do. But even outside, again, my main point here is even outside of those decks, picture this instead in like Sultai Reanimator, where, you know, you're playing, you want a 2-drop creature that does something good for your reanimation strategy. Well, in this case, you get a pretty decently statted blocker that can also attack for a couple of points if that's what you want it to do. But if nothing else, decent toughness on this guy, blocks for a couple of turns, and in the meantime can actually put multiple cards in your graveyard for you, can actually draw multiple cards for you. Plus, here, I'll give you one more deck idea before I get off this card, because I have a million of them. Let's say you're playing some sort of land-centric deck with Aftermath Analyst, or Lumra, or some other splendid reclamation effect like that, right? Well, this allows you to play it as your 2-drop, discard lands for a couple of turns, just get them all back with Aftermath Analyst. That's pretty good too, so I don't know, man. I really do think there is something to this card. Now, this thing may have its nose shoved into a book, but it's going to shove your opponent's nose into something way harder is all I'm saying. But number 3 is Insidious Bookworm. Now, I have to make a concession here because this card carries a slightly higher price tag during pre-sale, at least, than some of the other uncommons in the set, but it is far from the most expensive or even the top 5 most expensive uncommons in the set. But that price does not translate into any actual buzz that I've seen online about it. Maybe you guys are in the right chat rooms or message boards or discords or whatever, but I just really haven't seen anybody talk about the thing. And every time I talk about it, there's people in the comments section or the chat or whatever who basically say, like, actually this card is bad, which I just don't get. Because maybe what you haven't seen yet, maybe you haven't noticed, is that this card is actually Growth Spiral. See, in case you still need some hand-holding here, you play the card on your turn 1, and then on turn 2, you use it to cast Growth Spiral for 2 mana at instant speed, and honestly, it's in some ways not entirely better than Growth Spiral, but it is, again, the key phrase here, qualifier, in some ways better than Growth Spiral because you don't have to have 2 specific colors of mana to use the activated ability. So, just to get you completely up to speed here, I know you're following along, I just want to make sure. That's ramp and a drawn card on turn 2 in Standard. On a guy that can eat a block in the early game. How is that not the most phenomenal card in the set? I think there are better cards in the set, surprisingly. But as far as like utility, like little dudes go, and you know how much I love little utility dudes, I think this is far and away like the best of those in this entire set, and one of the best of those in Standard, because not only does it cast Growth Spiral, it also casts Disenchant, which is also crazy. I'm telling you, this card gets rid of 2 different extremely problematic permanent types in Standard right now, whether you're removing an Urabrass Forge or an Innkeeper's Talent or a Caretaker's Talent or a Simulacrum Synthesizer. You have modes to use the sacrifice ability on, but if you'd rather just ramp on turn 2 and draw a card, who can blame you? Cast Growth Spiral instead. And again, all of this is on a dude that can chump block and activate his ability. Nuts. Absolutely freaking crazy. How is not everyone on the internet talking about this card? How is it not a $5 uncommon during pre-sale? I just don't get it. I think this card is bonkers. All I'm going to say to finish this card up is that Fungus is, in my opinion, more or less undeniably a good card, but we don't have much room for more cards on this list. Sorry. So let's move on to number 2, which is Peer Past the Veil here. This is another one that I see people not only not paying attention to, but when they do pay attention to it, they kind of say it's bad. The only other person I've seen say this card is good is Jim Davis. Good job, Jim. A pro Magic player thinks this card is good, so I think I'm at least in decent company. You guys know Jim. You like Jim. He's a good guy. Good at Magic. Whatever. And I agree that this card might actually be something really, really special, whether you're trying to get Delirium, which this card can help you do all in one fell swoop. That's a phrase people use, right? I think so. Or if you're just a Reanimator deck and like the only cards left in your hand are large people. You want to get rid of them large people, put them in your yard, and then draw into the Reanimator spell, which is going to happen some of the time too. But even just on its face, even if you're not trying to do something weird with Delirium, you're not reanimating peoples, this card can just draw you 3. Like really easily, at instant speed. I feel like this card would normally be like sorcery speed, but they decided to throw us a little bit of a bone here and make it a 4 mana instant speed card. You know that in the last few years, 4 mana draw 2s with an upside have seen a fair amount of play in standard. Sometimes they have to be really good like Memory Deluge, and sometimes they don't have to be very good like Chemist's Insight. These cards have actually had a pretty good track record over the last half a decade in standard, or even more than that. So I could see a 4 mana instant speed draw 3, 4, 5, 8 cards at the absolute highest amount in standard right now. That's good, right? Is that arguable? I'm not really sure. Discarding your hand is not something you always want to do, but it's effectively a wheel effect at instant speed that, again, if you're playing your cards right, literally, is going to draw you 4 cards at least. And I think it's worth noting, too, that there is not a single blue mana symbol in this card's cost, so your Jund deck can play it. Your Naya deck can play this card, and I actually think there's a pretty good Naya control deck coming together. So all I'm saying is that you should probably do your best not to peer past this card when you're looking for stuff to draw cards in deck building. I actually think there's a ton of potential on this card, but that said, what is my number 1? And I'll give you a hint. It's a room. What could it possibly be? Now, I wanted a couple of these on the list, and it really wasn't too hard to find good candidates. I think that a lot of people are undervaluing these. I've seen a lot of people with a knee-jerk reaction, both on Reddit and in my comments section, where they just don't like these. And some people have even said they just skip over them during previous seasons. So these just aren't getting the attention that a lot of them deserve, because I do think a lot of them are potentially game-breaking, not just game-winning. So with that said, let's take a look at what I think is not only the best sleeper in the set, but potentially one of the best single cards in the set in general. And to do that, we're going to have to step into the very first room of the house. It's Charred Foyer, or Foyer if you want to be a pretentious real estate agent. Now, this is attached to a card called Warped Space, which I do think is the main attraction on the card, but Foyer itself, I think, is actually getting a little bit of malignment. This is another one of those where not only do people not talk about it in a positive light, but when people do deign to talk about it at all, they usually talk about how it kind of sucks. I don't necessarily agree. Now, on its face, is 4 mana at sorcery speed for this effect on Charred Foyer good? Probably not. Again, on its face, in a vacuum, we are taught to believe that sorcery speed effects like this, you have to wait till the next turn to use them and whatever. It's just, they're not good. However, in this case, I definitely think this is one you want to look out for. It's a little bit like Roaring Furnace and Steaming Sauna, right? Once you find that opening thanks to a sweeper, or you've controlled the board state, however you do that, then maybe you find an opening for Steaming Sauna and you just get good card advantage for the rest of the game. The same thing could be said about Charred Foyer. This is basically an extra card every single turn, a one-sided Howling Mind, and after a sweeper, I'm pretty sure you can find room to play that card. When you do have both cards unlocked, they work really well with one another. Obviously, Charred Foyer is getting you a free card every turn, and Warp Space is allowing you to cast it for free, which is almost a one with the multiverse. It's very, very close, and I'm pretty sure that card's good, but it works really well with a bunch of other cards and mechanics and stuff that allow you to put spells into exile and then cast them later, basically any adventure card this works well with. So if you have Virtue of Loyalty, for instance, and you make your little 2/2 Vigilant Token guy on turn 2 or whenever you do it up under this on the curb, and then you unlock Warp Space later in the game, well, now you just get to play your Virtue of Loyalty for free, which is nuts. Also works really well with the green Virtue. I want to throw that out here. So the green Virtue is relatively expensive to play the enchantment mode on, but it's only 1 mana to play the adventure half. So just get something halfway decent back from your graveyard, doesn't even really matter, throw it on top, and then later on in the game you unlock Warp Space and you get a discount on this ridiculous mana ramp ability on the green Virtue. Same thing with Virtue of Persistence. Virtue of Persistence, played in the early game, kill that guy, gain some life, whatever, and then when you unlock Warp Space you get a discount on Virtue of freaking Persistence, which is crazy. It also works with adventures that don't see quite as much play, stuff like Stormkeld Vanguard, which is a serviceable but not great 2 mana sorcery speed disenchant effect on the adventure half, and then a way too expensive 6/7 on the other half. But when you start getting that 6/7 for free, the card becomes much better. And Just while we're on adventure, guys, just one last thing I want to talk about on that tip is something I haven't heard anyone say that I think is actually potentially a very important play with this card. If you played a Horn Lock Whale earlier on in the game, the adventure half of it that only costs 2 mana, well, note the way Warp Space is worded, it doesn't just let you do this during your turn. It's just once during each turn. So that means that if I have a Horn Lock Whale in exile, I get to play it for 0 mana during my opponent's turn. And if that doesn't sound like a strong line, what? How come? There's also slightly dumber stuff that could still nonetheless work, like Outrageous Robbery, grab all your opponent's cards, cast the most expensive ones for free. Sick idea, Dev. Also, Hugs, Grizzly Guardian, is a pretty awesome creature to play along this guy, you know? Even if you only, you know, made X equal 1 or 2, then you'll still get a free card off of Hugs. But when X equals 5 or something and you rip a really good card off the top of your library, play it for free, Jack. That seems awesome. Bonehorde Dracosaur. You know, that's great. It gets you 2 free cards every single turn off the top of your library that you can cast when you want to. What if you didn't have to pay mana to play one of them? Would that be good? I don't know, man. Card just seems really good to me. And oh, by the way, probably the biggest piece of tech. Did you know it works with Ren's Resolve? Of course you did. That's the most obvious thing. But it just goes to show you there's really no limit, in a way, to the amount of cards in Standard this works really, really well with. But we made it through the video together, everybody. Hip, hip. Foyer, we did it. But anyway, that's all I've got for this one. There were maybe 7 cards that I left off this list that I really wanted to put on the list. So with that said, there's probably a few cards that you would have put on your sleepers list that you didn't see here. Now, they might be on the top X cards in the set list when we get to that in a few days, but still, I want to know what you would have put on your sleeper list that didn't show up here. But apart from that, now's the time to lean back, do the call to action. Because I'm a YouTuber, it's part of my job. Make sure you like the video before you get out of here. That puts it in more people's recommended feeds, at least theoretically. You can also share the video around. That forcibly puts it in people's recommended feeds. And on Twitter and Facebook and whatever, I would really appreciate if you'd give this one a share. Do people still share videos? I don't know. Try and see if it still works. I'm not sure. But one way or the other, you can also check out the Patreon if you really want to support the content around here and, you know, make for many more years of spoiler season and sleepers lists and top 50s and deck techs and all the stuff that I do. If you enjoy it, I'd appreciate $1 a month. I think I'm worth it. But that $1 a month really goes a long way to making sure that I still have a job around here. But with that, I gotta say, we are donezo for this one-zo. Again, just hit me up with your sleeper ideas down there in the comments section, and I will catch you cats later. I am Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.